if you are seeing this new podcast episode popping up in your feed, it's because once upon a time, you listened to a little show called Bioluminescence by yours truly, Greg Ellis, aka the Laser Shark. For the last 4 years, I've been trying to figure out a way to bring the show back, but in a different way. And thanks to my new co-host, Dorian Weinzimmer, I think I've figured it out. This show is now called The Stroke of Midnite. And essentially, it's a show about being creative, whatever that means, and how creativity inspires creativity. So for over, a year now, I've had this pilot episode planned in my mind. I have been writing a thesis, so to speak, on the great live performers in my life. But like all good live performers, we're flexible, and we're throwing that idea right out the window. So not too recently, or very recently, not too long ago, a very profound creative passed away. His name was David Lynch, and he was Dorian's biggest inspiration. So I figured, what better way to introduce Dorian to the audience than to let him take over for this first episode and say some things about David. And I will add as much as I can, being someone who didn't follow him that closely, but has always been aware of him. I did do a little research, and I might surprise you with some stuff later. But for now, ladies and gentlemen, episode 1 of The Stroke of Midnite, David Lynch, Dorian Weinzimmer. Take it away, my friend.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Greg. First off, thank you for inviting me to be your co-host and be a part of this glorious podcast endeavor. I'm very, very excited to be a part of this. And personally, I, much like our audience, I'm sure, got very excited by your introduction and your promise of a thesis of the great live performers. I am also very excited to hear this. But Greg was, with the recent passing of David Lynch, and Greg knowing what an influence he was on me, he was kind enough to say, like, hey, you know what? If you want to talk about him a little bit, it obviously fits into the larger goal of creativity, and be a great way to just like introduce me to the audience, hopefully. Since, I'm sure if you're here, you're familiar with Greg, but probably have no clue who I am. So
a little behind the scenes, Dorian has been working on a project of sorts for Pretty Lights for quite some time now. I don't know how much we're allowed to say about that, so we'll leave it at that for now.
The teaser got released on the VHS in Vegas. So,
there you go. Yes.
It's out there. I'm working on a documentary, which, don't get your hopes up about seeing it anytime soon. It's going to be a while. I actually wanted to put in the trailer at the end, I wanted it to say coming later, because coming soon has been kind of like a bit of like a negative statement.
It's a trigger word.
For a long time. I wanted to make sure that people knew that, like, hey, we're working on this, but like it's going to be some time.
Yeah.
But I am a filmmaker, primarily a writer and director, although I do a lot of editing, producing, basically whatever needs to be done to get the project done. I've held boom poles before. I've done color correction. I've done basically every job there is on a film set. But primarily I write and direct. So that's where my relationship with David Lynch obviously comes into play. And I guess really to just put it in the simplest way possible, Lynch's influence on me is so profound and essential to the path that I've taken in life that, like, without it, I'm not here recording this podcast. Like, I wouldn't have, and everything that entails, like, I wouldn't have ended up down this road of filmmaking and meeting the people who eventually brought me into Derek's orbit and working with Pretty Lights and with Greg and all the other incredible people that are part of this whole camp.
Yeah. I think so. Real quick. So like one of the most interesting things, and this is something I've been thinking about lately as we've discussed the whole concept of this show, is every person that you follow, there is a direct muse, right? It's a very obvious thing, whether they've talked about it or whether they exude their influence, whatever. The direct muse, the person or people that kind of set you on the path, right? And so like everyone commonly knows that, you know, Fish would be that for me. You know, David is that for you. And just to break off for just 2 seconds, the idea of this show, probably moving forward after these first couple episodes, is to talk about the indirect muses, the ones that aren't obvious and the ones that you would never think have as much of an impact on you as they might. So we're going to get us started by paying homage to our direct muses. There's a little teaser for episode 2. All right, back to you, Dorian.
All good. No, that's perfect because Greg has hinted to me, well, he's told me what they are, but he's told me that part of this thesis involves sort of like a holy trinity of sorts.
That's right.
Of the 3 sort of like big pillars upon which his approach to this has been built upon, or his understanding of it came from. I'll let him discuss that, of course. But I also have sort of a personal holy trinity of sorts. And David Lynch, of course, is part of that. But more specifically, it's, and I've been saying this for years, I think everything that I ever do will be some sort of combination of Evil Dead 2, the Metal Gear Solid video game series, and Mulholland Drive. Those are the 3 pillars for me as a creative. And just to give a quick synopsis of some of those things, Evil Dead 2 is a movie that's incredible. If you haven't seen it, just do yourself a favor. But that's a movie that like taught me what a director does. Like my dad and my brother and I were all big, you know, movie people. And, you know, it was one of those we discovered when I was probably too young to see a movie like that. You know, like 7 or 8 or something like that. And we just thought it was this like hilarious, crazy movie. And over the years, as I matured and just started to think about things differently, like I started seeing beyond that in this film and like started to understand like how much intent was there. You know, like for me, when I was younger, it was just kind of like, maybe they didn't know what they were doing. I don't know. Like maybe this was just a stupid idea that they committed to. But like, as I developed and started to understand more and more about film, I understood like how much control was being exerted in that film and how much of like, you know, what it's like to have a vision and to bring that to life and to see things in a way that's very different from sort of the standard, you know, method of storytelling that film has taken upon itself. So, you know, that's where I understood like what a director's vision was and what they do as far as like guiding how a story is told and how a movie is made. Flash forward a little bit further into high school when the first Metal Gear Solid game came out. That game had a profound impact on me, and the creator, Hideo Kojima, is not only is his name tattooed on my back, but he is with some design as well. Sure. It's not just Hideo Kojima on my back, which would be kind of amazing. But yeah, he was the first sort of media I had been exposed to that kind of took like what I loved about movies at the time, which was like, you know, the big spectacle kind of storytelling, exciting, you know, kind of big budget stuff that, you know, he took that, but he adds this incredibly idiosyncratic artistry to it that there's just so much weird shit going on in this game.
Oh yeah.
But it's all surrounded by this like really compelling, really big, very approachable, you know, kind of like mega budget storyline.
Sure.
And I'd never seen anybody combine those two things like that before. And it really like that kind of opened the door for me to like understanding the more artistic goals of these mediums that for me at the time were still just like purely for entertainment.
Was this was this the one on PS1 or PS2?
PlayStation 1.
Okay. Yeah. I did play that. I think. Yeah, I did.
Yeah. blew me away.
Yeah. I was a Final Fantasy guy, so I always went a little bit more into the fantastical. But I do remember like that game being very compelling and very fucking challenging.
It was a very different style of gameplay.
Yeah.
I was a huge Final Fantasy nut as well. I actually imported a Japanese copy of Final Fantasy VII before it came out in the US, because at that point it took 9-10 months for localization to happen on those types of games. And they had released a demo of FF7 on a disc, and I played it and I was like, I need to play this game. And I found a place where I could import a Japanese copy, do this swap trick with the PlayStation 1 where you have to swap discs while it's booting up to fool the region code. And then from a BBS server, that's a bulletin board system for anyone who has no idea what that is, which is probably
we're gonna lose 3/4 of the audience on that one, probably.
Yep.
we're gonna lose you guys a lot, but hopefully we'll send you on some cool journeys too. So
that's right. Yeah. But yeah, found someone who had done hundreds of pages of translations, even for all the menus, and was able to play the whole game in Japanese. But anyway, so yeah, that's my quick Final Fantasy VII story. But yeah, Metal Gear Solid really kind of opened that door for me. And then in college, I originally I was a math and science kid growing up. So I originally went to school, to college for electrical engineering, actually. And kind of had discovered a creative streak in myself late in high school. And when I actually went to college and started really seriously studying electrical engineering, it was okay, I have a talent for this, but I have zero passion for this. And I do not want to spend the rest of my life doing this. And sometime, I think it was my sophomore or junior year, me and one of my roommates at the time, whose name was Ben Jardine, him and I and his girlfriend at the time, whose name I do not recall, rented Mulholland Drive on VHS. I had never seen any David Lynch movies. I was aware of this film. It had gotten a lot of Oscar buzz and stuff like that. And but yeah, I knew who he was, but I'd never seen any of his movies. So we rented it and watched it and ended up going out afterwards and spending probably 3 or 4 hours just talking about this movie over super cold beers. I remember how cold these beers were. It seemed very pertinent to the entire experience, but just because of how surreal and elevated reality that Lynch takes things to in his movies, it was all of my sensory perceptions were elevated as a result of having watched it. And it did feel like my hand was freezing while I was touching these beers, was just how, I don't know, in tune I felt to just now, you know, being that elusive thing of really being in the moment, having no past or present in your mind, you know, that sort of flow state where you're just right there.
Sure.
And that was the first time I had really experienced that. And it was just as a result of watching this movie and it opening my mind up to these possibilities that I'd never considered before. And being a math and science guy, I've always had a very logically structured mind in a lot of ways. And, you know, what was so compelling about Mulholland Drive and what Lynch does in general is for how much has been made of what an abstract and sort of challenging artist he is, David was this incredible storyteller. You know, his movies obviously go all over the place, but if you ever hear him talk and just listen to him tell a story, it's unbelievable. He's a master at it. And I think that's why he started moving into more and more abstract territory, because just telling a straight ahead story was obviously the easiest thing in the world for this guy.
Yeah, he was challenging himself.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And so, you know, he integrates enough of that into his films to bring you in. And that's exactly what Mulholland Drive did for me. It provided my logical mind with a compelling enough hook and mystery that while it was sort of preoccupied with that, my guard was let down and all of the abstraction was kind of able to covertly circumvent those logical defenses and actually penetrate.
Yeah.
I think all the sort of more art film type of stuff that I had seen prior to that, I kind of, you know, was a little unwilling to accept it or kind of engage with it in its territory and on its
I think
terms.
When you I went through a similar phase when I was in my late teens, early 20s, where let's go find the stuff that no one's offering us, I guess would be a good way to put it. And so like the art films and so on. And like all too often, I always found that like a lot of movies, especially like in the 90s, seem to be pushing the limits for the sake of pushing the limits of whatever their intentions were. And oftentimes that goal, it came with sacrifices, whether it was the digestibility of the movie or the coherence of the movie, or, you know, it's like, I think the great masters find a way to push those limits while not having to make those sacrifices.
Perfectly put, honestly. Yeah. It's exactly what that whole experience was. And like, I didn't know that these things could coexist, you know? It seemed like, as you said, it was, you were going to choose one or the other, and you just kind of had to like go all in on that.
Yep.
But he made it so, you know, made the film in a way that it was like, it invited me in, you know, it didn't feel like there was this sort of barrier to entry that I had to overcome. It was like, you could just sit down like you were watching a movie, and he would take you through that portal himself. He took it upon himself to make that happen.
Yeah.
And that's, you know, I think true of all of his films. But yeah, so anyway, after seeing it, it was, you know, this really just revelatory experience. And as I said, I was kind of searching for a more creative path. I had been writing a lot. Writing was really like probably my first and like true love as an artist. But at the time too, some of my like best friends were musicians, and I was really into music. I was also very into Fish at the time. And actually, Greg is the owner of all my old bootlegs now.
Yeah, they're right over there somewhere. I've got 3 different cassette decks that I'm working on this weird little chain system for recording and doing some funny things down the road. And nice. And so one of the things that I was thinking about doing was like dubbing, like whatever. I haven't gone through them since you gave them to me to like look at what shows specifically they are, but I had thought about like re-recording them 2 more times and then running them all at the same time on 3 different cassette players, running off of 3 different sets of speakers, and just seeing like the different tapes and the different tape decks and the warbles. And like, you know, these are the kind of thoughts you have when you haven't slept in like 6 months. Uh-huh. And you're like, all right, what weird, crazy idea can I come up with today? And that's a good example of pushing the limits just for the sake of pushing them, knowing all too well that it's not going to yield anything that special, but just like, what would happen if we did this? Let's find out.
Yep. And yeah, I mean, outside of Lynch's film work, there is so much stuff that he did that is very much in that world. I mean, he did a lot of commercial work and music video work that like definitely was very experimental, but even just he did a lot of just his own kind of independent, you know, video work that he did just to like, as digital technology was coming around, like, hey, let's just try this out and see what comes of it, you know? Yeah. And, you know, there's like a fearlessness as an artist that was like very inspiring as well, that like I started to understand, you know, from him too. He's such like a mild mannered guy when you hear him talk, and he sounds like he's got a very
funny high pitched voice too.
Yeah. Hi, I'm David Lynch.
Yeah.
But Mel Brooks, actually, who produced Elephant Man, David Lynch's second movie, described him. Yeah. Yeah. He was the one who basically gave Lynch his real start in the film industry after he made Eraserhead.
That's incredible. I mean, Mel Brooks is on the list for people to talk about on this show. Mel Brooks is one of the greatest like cinema minds in my opinion of all time, and to know that he sort of discovered David Lynch, I guess it makes it even that much more profound. That's fantastic.
Yeah, no, his understanding of the medium was well beyond Blazing Saddles and Young Frankenstein and the things that he's known for, which are great films, you know, and not to decry those in any way, but yeah, no, he was a real like student of the medium and much more of like a serious artist within it than I think a lot of people really realize. to the point that Elephant Man, at the beginning of it, it doesn't say his name at all. He started a production company called Brooks Film to sort of dissociate himself with it so that it wouldn't have this kind of comedic angle to it, or people wouldn't misinterpret it.
Especially that movie. Like, you don't want anything there being like taken, like, oh, are they mocking us?
Right.
Like,
yeah.
Yeah, that would not work out well.
No, yeah, that is a very sad movie of aching humanity, and to think that any of it was being played for yucks would be pretty disingenuous to the whole endeavor.
Wow.
But yeah, no, really incredible stuff. But he described David Lynch once as Jimmy Stewart if Jimmy Stewart was from the planet Jupiter. Because he's got this very like Midwestern, just like nice guy demeanor, and just says and thinks the craziest stuff you've ever seen or heard in your life.
I love that.
Yeah, no, it was really cool, and it's just a great description of his personality and the kind of contrast that he embodied and that embodied his work. I mean, that's really like, I think, the heaviest theme or element at its most boiled down, kind of like broadest expression would be that contrast is really where David Lynch lives. Between light and dark, between emotions, between, everything really. And he's such a master of it. But yeah, so anyway, to get, I guess, back to the story real quick. Saw Mulholland Drive, had this long conversation with it, and just kind of, it didn't have this immediate change on me where I was like, I got to go into film. But it planted a very direct seed for that. And, this was like 2001, 2002, like film, the digital revolution hadn't really happened. Film hadn't been like democratized to the level that it is now. Right. And it just seemed like one of those things that's like, it's just impossible to get into. Yeah. You couldn't even make a short film at that time without like buying a film camera and film and getting it developed and all this stuff. And it just seemed very unapproachable. So I took the next logical step, which was to drop out of college, move to Boston, and try to get into music school.
Perfect.
Yep. Because, as I mentioned, a couple of my best friends were musicians, and I just felt this urge and just didn't know where to go with it. I was like, I got to do something to like pursue this, but I don't fucking know what it is. So I've been playing guitar for a while and piano and stuff like that. And my friends were musicians. I was like, cool, I'll just go live with them and we'll like live this art life, where like we all hang out and make music together. And maybe I'll get into Berklee College of Music, where they were going in Boston, which was why I moved out there. But yeah, what ended up happening though was that I watched them become like exponentially better as musicians while I sort of floundered and stayed at the same level and realized like, this is not it. Eventually discovered a film school that was opening up in Chicago that was going to be very like digital oriented. My girlfriend at the time and I wanted to move back to Chicago anyway. So it was like, all right, cool. And the rest is history. Like I went into film school and never looked back. I've been doing it for, almost 20 years now, and, fucking love it. But yeah, it was all very much due to that experience, seeing Mulholland Drive, and the way that opened my mind up to, the way that David Lynch saw the world, and seeing it reflected the way that I had perceived the world back at me in a way that no other movie ever had. Like other movies had like events that happened in them that were sort of representative of like maybe some level of pessimism or anger towards like places where I had grown up. I grew up in the suburbs and stuff, and suburbia of course has its plenty of issues. Yes. But seeing the way that like Lynch viewed that part of like American society, and the way that he represented it through his images in such a more artistic and abstract way that was so subjective, that was like, clearly this isn't like reality, being shown right now. This is like what he perceived it as. And, just aligned with a lot of stuff that I had felt and seen before, and a lot of thoughts and, ideas that were kind of percolating from a creative standpoint were becoming much more visual. And even as a writer, I've, been sort of, I've been simultaneously applauded and criticized for the incredible level of detail generally that is in my writing.
Sure. Sure.
And it's because it's all it comes from a very visual place. Like I could really see the thing, you know, and so a lot of those ideas were, you know, ultimately revealed themselves to be very much, you know, kind of perfect for this medium. It was one of those like, wait, why am I not making images instead of trying to describe all of them?
Yeah. You're basically writing all the blocking notes and so on and so forth.
Yeah, all the production design, the costuming.
Totally. So one of the interesting things that I read about David Lynch, was it Lost Highway or was it Mulholland? But he actually designed a lot of the interior, like furniture and such. So
that's, like pretty much all of his work.
Okay. Yeah. So so he went beyond just writing and directing.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. He started as a fine artist, and actually, he was a painter for a long time. He did build furniture and like all that stuff. I mean, he did that up to his death. Like he had his whole studio in Los Angeles that he lived in. He built all sorts of cool stuff. But yeah, no, he told this great story about how what got him into film, because he wanted to be a painter. And
his paintings were incredible.
He was in the studio painting one day, and he was painting something. And like a gust of wind came through the window, and he heard this little like howl of the wind coming through the window, and it blew the canvas a little bit, and the image kind of started to move a bit. And he was like, that's what it's been missing. It's missing sound and movement. Like,
oh, wow.
That's what this painting needs. You know, that's what's bringing this image to life. So that is what got him into film. His first few short films really are exactly that. They're kind of like stop motion paintings, essentially. And then he moved further into, you know, live action and stuff, and then went into Eraserhead and never looked back. And that became his primary thing. But he always integrated all that stuff. So pretty much anything you see, there's so much great like behind the scenes footage and stuff of like, you know, these productions, there's anyone who knows anything about film, it's like these productions, there's tons of people, lots of money at play, schedules are crazy. It's like go, 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 you know, when you're in production. And if Lynch didn't like the color of something in the background of a shot, like he would stop the whole production and go like repaint it himself.
Oh, wow.
Or would be like, you know, that red is the wrong red. Like give me a bucket of like this paint and I will fix it. Or, you know, we need this lamp in this shot. And he would like, you know, actors have told stories like we were just hanging out watching him build this lamp so that we could get the shot done, because he just knew it needed to be there. And that was indicative of just like the incredible trust that he had in his own vision, that like he knew if he saw something, and even if he didn't understand why the idea presented itself, if he like just knew at a very like deep intrinsic level, like, no, like this is missing. We need this here. Yeah. I don't know why, but like we do.
Totally.
He would trust that implicitly and always move forward with it. And that was another huge inspiration that I've taken with me, because I'm much, you know, again, having sort of like more logical oriented mind. I'm a big planner. I like to have, you know, things kind of meticulously plotted out and everything. And, you know, I've learned from him. I've challenged and forced myself to do things in a way more in line with how he would do them, which was to say, like, you know, I'll go in with a plan, but like if something presents itself, even if I'm not like totally sure why it is, like I have to trust that just like I'm in the moment with this thing, like I am here on the level of this thing that I am creating, and if this idea is presenting itself, there's a reason for that, so I need to go with it, like no matter what.
Yeah, totally.
And some of my favorite stuff that I've ever come up with has resulted from that. So, you know, it's a hard thing to do. It takes a lot of you know, there can be a lot of fear, like, is this just a crazy idea that's going to ruin the whole thing, you know? But it's never happened.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, speaking from experience, what's the best way to say this? I think when you get those little scratches, you got to itch them.
Yeah.
And because if you don't, you're never going to be satisfied with whatever it is that you did. Like, you'd be like, I'm almost positive you would rather see it go down in flames than to not at least try to set it on fire.
Yeah.
You know, like, I mean, I've done that a million times in shows where it's just like, I don't know why, but I'm doing this thing now, and more often than not it works. And beyond that, if it doesn't work, it will generally lead to something else working that much better later, because you're like, okay, I tried it, it flopped, but you generally learn something from it, which will then benefit you down the road also. So, like, you know, these are like the great lessons that any creative can offer, where it's like, trust your instincts, but also be fearless, and don't, if you're at the head of the table, so to speak, he's not answering to anyone. Maybe there was a money man he had to answer to from time to time, but ultimately he earned the ability to just do whatever the fuck he wanted. That mindset is what will set you apart ultimately from everyone else, is, fearlessness, but also like true, like self-awareness and intuition.
And not being a live performance film, and that there's a whole editorial process. It does add some leniency as well, for sure. That it gives you the freedom to kind of be like a fearless artist, but also like a ruthless editor. Yeah. So when you look at
fix it in post.
You've really got to like sit down and take a look at those things and be like, no matter how hard this shot was, or how much money it costs, or like how much time we've spent on it, if it's not right, like you've got to commit to that and say like, what, it's not right. It's got to go.
Yeah. Totally.
I mean, those are all like lessons that I learned just from his seemingly simple ability to just kind of like really totally trust himself.
Yeah.
And, it's been instrumental to my growth as a filmmaker and as an artist in any stripe that I have committed myself to.
So I want to just turn a corner a little bit. I want to kind of get into some of maybe his, like, because we were talking about his decision making, but like, are there like specific like Lynchian stylistic things that really stand out to you that, like that are kind of a through line through all of his work? Or was he more open-ended and reinventing himself constantly with every film? Because I know for me anyway, like with the limited knowledge that I have, like there's definitely some stylistic similarities between Mulholland Drive, Lost Highway, Blue Velvet, like that whole it was Blue Velvet post Twin Peaks.
That was right before Twin Peaks.
Yeah, but that whole kind of era for him, I know there's a lot of things that like stylistically are similar, but also stand on their own.
Yeah, no, absolutely. No, there's definitely a major through line through his films, particularly from, I'd say, Blue Velvet onward, which was actually his fourth film. So his first movie was Eraserhead, and then he did Elephant Man, and then he did famously Dune.
That's right. That's right. I forgot he did that.
And right after Dune, he did Blue Velvet. And for me, that's when, like, it's funny because since he passed away, I've been rewatching all of his films chronologically, because I've seen them all multiple times, but I've never watched them in the order that he made them. Because as I mentioned, Mulholland Drive was the first for me, and that was actually his second to last film.
Yeah.
So he was pretty well established as like who he was, what his reputation was, and all that type of stuff at that point in time. And, I'm realizing now, looking at his movies kind of in order, that like Blue Velvet was the first time that we really saw like David Lynch as we would know him, as his reputation would be for the rest of his life.
When he went from that's when he turned the corner from being a great director to a auteur.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. I mean, Eraserhead is obviously like super duper artsy.
Yeah.
Have you seen Eraserhead before?
I saw it once when I was like 19. I was probably on mushrooms or something, and I just remember being like, this was not the right movie to watch on mushrooms.
Yeah,
that's basically my take. That's my takeaway from it. If I'm being totally honest, I have these intentions to go back and watch a lot of these movies, and this has been one of the great things. So Dorian and I, we've known each other for years and years and years, but we've really, really gotten to know each other over the last 18 months or so, and it kind of like sparked this little thing that I had like when I was a kid, where I grew up loving movies. My intention was to actually go to school for like film studies and then kind of see where it led me, because I was obsessed with like Alfred Hitchcock and Woody Allen, like some more like the more like classic, like big time directors, I guess. But
yeah.
And so like in all of our conversations, it always comes back to these like either a film reference or a music reference or this. And I was like, Jesus Christ, man, like we complement each other really well because we're both really broad in our understanding of these things, but we definitely come from different angles, which I love. And so I think you'll see as this show kind of evolves, one of us is going to be informing the other more often than not. And this is a great example of Dorian informing me because, yeah, I mean, I've seen all of these movies at least once, but they never really like latched on to me the same way that they clearly have for you. But hearing you talk about it, I'm like, Jesus Christ, I need to go back and watch these because like I see and I hear a lot of similarities in like mentality, which is like ultimately what I'm always looking for. People that think similarly to how I think about being creative. The art form or even the aesthetic isn't always that important. It's the decision making. It's the higher power kind of essence of it all. That really like resonates with me. So like you could be, you know, the greatest director in Hollywood or in Bollywood, I was going to, you know, in India or something. Right. And if you have that ability to kind of create on a higher level, it's going to talk to me. And I, you know, and I would assume most other people too, but like, you know, that's where I try to like seek out things. So like, regardless of genre or taste or anything, it's always about the core abilities of a person. So this one's super intriguing to me, and I went and I tried to do a little bit of quick research before we did this show, and the thing that I never knew was that he was a painter. And like his paintings like spoke to me like very powerfully. I was like, holy shit, these are incredible.
Awesome. Yeah.
Does he have anything like is he like in like the Met in New York or in LA, or do you know of anywhere where there
a couple like retrospectives in the past, that have come to like that have been done in like Los Angeles, where he lived pretty much his entire filmmaking career. He loved it there. Once he said the golden sunshine in Los Angeles, like once he saw the color of the sunrise and the sunset, he was like, I'm never leaving. Yeah. But yeah, no, surprisingly rare, unfortunately, that they're exhibited.
Yeah.
I'm not sure, you know, I don't think he cared all that much about like selling them or exhibiting them. Sure. For him, it was all about just the act of creation. Yeah. And obviously he was successful enough as like a filmmaker and everything that he didn't like need to sell them. I'm sure there's people that have bought them and they're in private collections, but I'm aware of at least like one kind of retrospective that was done a few years ago in LA, but not as much as you'd expect. I would hope that now, you know, posthumously
passing. There's got to be something coming up.
There'd be more of a, an impetus to do something like that. Cause I would fly wherever I need to fly to go see that.
I'll go with you. I need to go see those paintings. I mean, they're fucking crazy. Like
they're incredible.
There's like a modern day Dali-ness to them. You know, it's very like surrealism. But much more minimal, but also at the same time, like very like powerful. I don't know. It's hard to describe. And obviously I'm just me flipping through my iPad looking at them, and I was like, geez, I need to see these in person.
They're amazing. I mean, his experimentation with just like the exact mediums he used too. Like he would, you know, for him, painting wasn't just paint. You know, it could be anything that could be applied to it. So
the quote that I read that really like hit me hard was, he's like, I want nature to paint more than I do, or something along those lines. He was very open to like how things work together, and not, you know, it wasn't about the technique. It wasn't about the, you know, it was just like, let's see where this goes kind of mentality. And if things happened incidentally, embrace them and see where they take you. And that's always been a big part of how because I only took a painting a few years ago. So like technically I have the technique of a 4-year-old probably, but for whatever reason, my paintings resonate with people because there's this openness to seeing how, you know, oh, I did this thing. It didn't quite work the way I thought it would, but maybe it can take me somewhere else. And then, you know, you go on that little journey, and then eventually you find this place where like, okay, this actually can speak to people. And that's You know, that's ultimately the goal with painting, especially, is like being able to convey something, whether it's an emotion or a thought or a memory or whatever the case may be. But you want to be able to like say something to the people that are looking at it, and he had that in spades for sure.
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, ability to capture a moment and translate it in a way that will communicate it back to the viewer, through the medium. It's, it was never about communicating like a subject. It was always about communicating the intent.
Yeah.
And, he was so brilliant at that, not only in film, but in, his painting. And I mean, even his furniture, like that I've seen that he's built is like, I mean, it's all over his movies. There's so much stuff where you just like see this one object, and if you're like familiar with his art at all, you're like, okay, David built that, like there's no question about it.
So
it's super.
I'm sorry. So I think, because we're getting close on time. I do want to tell us why Twin Peaks, after 35 years or whatever it's been, is still something that is so very relevant in pop culture. Because that show, I think, probably is his most famous work, I guess, would be the fairest way to describe it. I mean, and so
I would totally agree with that assessment.
Yeah.
It's definitely his most accessible.
Yeah.
Because, partially... And it's funny because I just rewatched Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me, which is the movie that he did after the show. And it's, the tonal difference between the show and that movie could not be larger. It's, the show, obviously, it was on network television. Yeah. So there's a lot of constraints that come with that. And you asked earlier about sort of signature, what are stylistic, things that are associated with Lynch. And definitely like, one of the big things, and especially when I was first introduced to him, was like he's a very dark artist. His stuff is violent, deals with very unsavory people and topics, and that's all very true. And Twin Peaks kind of had this blend of the two, because there's this character, Kyle MacLachlan's character, Agent Dale Cooper, who's an FBI agent that's going to this town to investigate this murder that, coincides with other murders that he's been investigating. And he is like David Lynch, basically just in the show. Like his whole character is obviously based off of just Lynch himself.
Okay.
He's this very kind of like, even though he's surrounded by this like really dark, awful stuff, he's this kind of happy-go-lucky guy who, kind of takes it all as it comes. Like he's emotionally affected by these things, but he doesn't let those things overwhelm him. And it was like a way of kind of taking a viewpoint into something like really, really dark that I think everybody in America could see was like festering underneath the American dream. And he trained a microscope on it in a way that didn't pull any punches, but also like had this kind of ambassador that allowed us to look at these things in a way that wasn't like overwhelmingly depressing or like suicidal, because they're really, really dark topics that he gets into with that show. I mean, it's a great, just like murder mystery first and foremost. It's got so much, the characters are so different from anything you've ever seen on any other television show. And I mean, in all honesty too, like every major prestige show nowadays, the creators have at one point or another specifically stated that like the only reason I was able to do Sopranos or Breaking Bad or Mad Men or whatever was because of Twin Peaks.
Yeah. It was the first
that show opened the door for all of us to do different things with like television, serialized kind of episodic content. And so its influence reigns, all over, every artist that works in that medium now. But yeah, just as like a phenomenon in and of itself, I feel like he really was able to kind of tap into something that like everybody was really feeling at the time, but nobody could really express. And he brought it forth in a way that, was accessible without being sanitized. So it had one of those, it had like a train wreck kind of quality to it. Like you were like, I don't want to know this, but like, I can't look away. You know?
I always thought of it as like it was like the perfect bridge from, because it kind of took from like the dark grittiness of like mainstream movies. When you think of like Taxi Driver and stuff like that, where it, you know, the dark grittiness of like the late 70s into the 80s of cinema, but like conversely TV was like so bubblegummy, like happy-go-lucky, and it kind of like blurred the lines between those two worlds, and it made possible like what TV would become. Because like you think about like, you know, whether you call it like the MTV era or the grunge era or whatever, but like it predates that just slightly, but it really allowed for all of that to become like normalized, you know, because like on TV prior to that, it was Carson, and it was sitcoms, and it was cooking shows, and that was it, you know, like there wasn't
everything's great all the time.
Yeah, exactly. And it was by far the most like forward thinking like TV show for its time. And and it 100% like, you know, it opened the door for so much more than I think even just like serialized dramas. You know, I think like, I don't want to go as far as to say like dumb shit like Ren and Stimpy wouldn't exist without it, but like the notion of like how far can we take something in mainstream media, you know, like it definitely,
there could be an appetite for these types of things.
Yeah, it changed the threshold for what people were willing to accept.
Right. Yeah, it wasn't just the like, you know, focus group approved kind of, you know, storylines or structures or, you know, genres that, you know, could hit. Like this took like a total risk and like swung for the fences in a totally different regard and became like the biggest hit.
Yeah. so that's what I was going to say. Like ratings wise, do you know, like was it the number one show for its time? Like,
I think the first season, I'm pretty sure. Yes.
Yeah.
Because the first season was sort of like a, you know, like a test from the network. It was a very short, only like 6 or 8 episodes, I'm trying to remember. And it exploded. It became like the must watch TV event of, you know, the week. And then the second season, it had a sharp drop off. Mostly because, I mean, if you've watched the show, the second season is like, you know, 24 episodes.
Yeah.
And it's just not nearly as good. Partially because David left the show to go make Wild at Heart, thinking that everything was kind of in order and he could trust, you know, the show to everybody that he worked with. And basically what happened was like not even halfway through the second season, they solved the murder. You find out who killed Laura Palmer. And
so then where do you go next?
He came back from making Wild at Heart and he's like, what the fuck is wrong? Why do you think people were watching?
So it was Lost before Lost.
Yeah. Yep. And so, so a lot of the second season is just kind of like meandering nonsense with like a bunch of these weird characters just kind of going about their lives. And it's like, why are we here? You know? But Lynch came back for the finale. I think they delayed the finale by a couple months because he was so unhappy with it that he was like, no, I'm going to rewrite and reshoot this entire thing. And then the finale of the second season is mind blowing.
Yeah.
Absolutely incredible. And then opened the door for the film and then the revival series, which is like a masterpiece. But I have one little thing that I kind of wrote out that I think would be kind of maybe a perfect way to end.
Let's do it.
And you know, sort of feeds right out of this.
We're gonna get our first taste of Dorian's prose, which is generally speaking very profound. So,
oh well, thank you.
The floor is yours.
Thank you. So yeah, I mean, as I mentioned already, one of the things that Lynch has always been very heavily associated with is darkness and like dark subject matter, and not without due cause. I'm not going to like argue that that's not part of what he does, but I think it's really important to understand also that as a person, he was extraordinarily dedicated to both world peace and inner peace. He vehemently rejected the idea of pained, angry, suffering artists. He very much thought that these were things that artists needed to understand, but not things that we needed to endure constantly to create anything of value. He just rejected the approach to artistry that demands a pound of flesh for every ounce of beauty, and you know that declares that emotions can only be substantively interfaced with in a combative fashion. So, really rather than darkness being the dominant motif, I see it as he instead encounters the world with a very open emotional state and just takes things as he sees them, bright or dark as they may be, and just sets no conditions to the discovery of beauty. They might be anywhere within this world, and you have to look in the dark just as much as you have to look in the light to find them. And rewatching his films, I'm seeing this more and more, that like, for how dark the films are, he's not conjuring darkness for its own sake like a lot of movies do, just to be like pessimistic or edgy or whatever. But rather he used it as an entry point for these like brilliant points of light that pierce it. And I think it's really short-sighted to ignore and discredit the many, many moments of levity, humanity, and just pure goodness that are like equally trademark of his touch in my mind. And that, while his worlds are generally enveloped in darkness, he never fails to take the time to point his camera towards those patches of light, and not in a way that's offering any like false sugary hopes that the light might be winning out over all of this horrible things in the world, but because he cared deeply about just reminding us that it is out there and it's not given up, and neither should we.
That was beautiful.
Thank you.
Yeah, I love that. I'm going to share something with you offline that you'll very much appreciate, because I finally started using the typewriter while I was
awesome.
while I was in Hawaii, and that struck a chord for sure. That was fantastic.
Awesome. Well, yeah, and a big part I should also mention just real quick too, because this is another connection between Greg and myself, is so I discovered transcendental meditation through David Lynch.
Yeah,
because he's been doing it since like the 1970s, and this whole philosophy about inner peace and world peace, and like kind of bringing that calmness to yourself so that you can eliminate those poisons and actually access your deeper consciousness and really find those meaningful ideas and like your own artistry and your own voice and vision. It was through transcendental meditation that he accomplished all those things.
Yeah. And
and then that's how I got drawn into it and started practicing it, and then come to find out a few months ago that Greg also is a TM practitioner.
I am a big fan. I'm not going to say who inspired me yet. We could talk about that next week too. I may have said it at some point, but either way, that was amazing. I think, anyone who reaches the stature that he does, leaves a forever mark on the world, I guess would be a nice way to put it. And what Dorian just said was, more meaningful in the sense of, like, to me anyway, that regardless of the medium, it's the concepts, always the concepts. And we're going to keep exploring concepts of artistry and creativity and inspiration and all of those sorts of things, and how we can tie them all together into whatever endeavors we choose. So many of these podcasts, you hear musicians talk about music, you hear comedians talk about comedy, you hear painters talk about paint. Fuck all of that. We are going to just talk about whatever makes us happy and whatever inspires us to keep doing whatever the fuck it is we're doing today. So until next week, this has been Greg and Dorian, and this is the Stroke of Midnite. Till next time. Bye-bye.